Hello, and welcome to the Street Crime USA YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Today, we look at one of the biggest crime bosses to ever exist in the American criminal underworld. A boss who became so powerful the feds are unable to find him to this day. Frank Larry Matthews, born on February the 13th, 1944, who was also known as Black Caesar, Mark IV, and Pee-wee, is an American drug trafficker who sold heroin and cocaine throughout the eastern United States from 1965 to 1972. At the peak of Mr. Matthews' career, Mr. Matthews operated in 21 states and supplied drug dealers throughout every region of the country. The Drug Enforcement Administration, or DEA, ranks Mr. Matthews as one of the top 10 drug traffickers in US history, and Mr. Matthews is estimated to have had $20 million in savings. Mr. Matthews led a flamboyant lifestyle with luxury homes, vehicles, and clothing, along with prime seats at sporting events and regular trips to Las Vegas, Nevada to launder money and gamble. Mr. Matthews hosted an African American and Hispanic drug dealers summit in Atlanta, Georgia in 1971, and another in Las Vegas in 1972, to discuss how to break the American mafia control of heroin importation. Mr. Matthews was arrested in 1973 on tax evasion and drug charges, but disappeared, and has been a fugitive from justice ever since. Mr. Matthews was born on February the 13th in 1944 in Durham, North Carolina. Mr. Matthews' mother died when Mr. Matthews was just 4 years old, and he was raised by his aunt, Marzella Steele, the wife of a Durham police lieutenant. Mr. Matthews was nicknamed Pee-wee and attended the East End Elementary School, but dropped out of school in the 7th grade. At age 14, Mr. Matthews led a teenage gang in stealing chickens from local farms. When confronted by a farmer, Mr. Matthews assaulted the farmer with a brick. Mr. Matthews was arrested in October 1960 and served a year for theft and assault at the Raleigh State Reformatory for Boys in Raleigh, North Carolina. Upon his release, Mr. Matthews moved to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where Mr. Matthews worked as a numbers writer. In Philadelphia, he made contacts that would become his future Philadelphia drug connections, including Major Coxon and members of the Black Mafia. Mr. Matthews was arrested again in 1963 and avoided conviction by agreeing to leave Philadelphia. Mr. Matthews moved to New York City and became a barber, collecting numbers as he had in Philadelphia, as well as working as a collector and enforcer. In 1965, Mr. Matthews grew tired of the numbers game and began to transition into the heroin drug trade in order to make significantly more money. In the early 1960s, the main supply of wholesale heroin was the Italian Mafia through their famed French connection. Mr. Matthews attempted to partner with the Gambino family and the Bonanno family, both part of the 5 families that controlled organized crime in New York City since the 1930s. However, both organizations declined. From Mr. Matthews' days in the numbers game, he knew of Spanish Raymond Marquez, a prolific Harlem numbers operator. Mr. Marquez put him in contact with Al Padrino, the New York Cuban mafia godfather Rolando Gonzalez Nunez, a major Cuban cocaine supplier, shortly before Mr. Gonzalez fled to Venezuela because of an upcoming indictment in the United States. Before fleeing, Mr. Gonzalez sold Mr. Matthews his first kilo of cocaine for $20,000, with a promise to supply more in the future. This relationship expanded into a lucrative and expansive drug trafficking network. Mr. Gonzalez began sending Mr. Matthews large loads of cocaine and heroin from South America. Mr. Gonzalez continued to be a major figure in the international cocaine trade, with bases in Miami, New Jersey, and New York, and partnerships with the Corsican Mafia, in particular Auguste Joseph Ricard of French Connection fame. Mr. Gonzalez was arrested in Caracas, Venezuela in the early 1980s, caught with 18 pounds of cocaine, and served 5 years in prison. Retired from a life of crime, Mr. Gonzalez lived with his wife Esmeralda on a small farm near Caracas until his death in 1992. Mr. Matthews expanded on this and, within a year, was one of the major players in the New York drug business. Realizing the need for diversification, Mr. Matthews would continually seek out sources of supply for narcotics, willing to do business with anyone as long as the product was sufficiently pure. Mr. Matthews also developed a cocaine dependence that grew along with Mr. Matthews' business and power. By the early 1970s, Mr. Matthews' organization was handling multi-million-dollar loads of heroin. The IRS estimates that Mr. Matthews earned over $10 million in 1972. According to the DEA, Mr. Matthews controlled the cutting, packaging, and sale of heroin in every major East Coast city. In New York City, Mr. Matthews operated 2 massive drug mills in Brooklyn, one located at 925 Prospect Place, nicknamed the Ponderosa, and the other at 101 East 56th Street. nicknamed the OK Corral. Both locations were heavily fortified and secured, with walls reinforced with steel and concrete protected by guards with machine guns. Besides controlling the retail sale of heroin, the organisation supplied other major dealers throughout the East Coast with multi-kilogram shipments for up to $26,000 per kilogram. Mr. Matthews purchased a house in the Mafia enclave in Tot Hill, Staten Island, right across the street from the crime boss Paul Castellano. Mr. Matthews was known to supply heroin to Philadelphia through Major Coxon, who then sold it to the Black Mafia. Mr. Matthews would take multiple trips to Las Vegas with suitcases full of cash to have the drug money laundered at casinos for a fee of 15 to 18%. In 1971, Mr. Matthews invited major African American and Hispanic drug traffickers throughout the country to attend a meeting in Atlanta. The DEA became aware of the meeting and monitored who attended. The topic of the meeting was how to import heroin without the Mafia. Those present decided to build stronger independent relationships with the Corsicans and possibly Cubans. In addition, they agreed to diversify their product to include cocaine, which was becoming available in massive quantities. This gathering of major drug traffickers throughout the United States is significant because it represented the changing nature of the drug business. Whereas previously the Italians controlled the importing and wholesaling of narcotics, therefore controlling who could and could not advance past them, now others were establishing their own pipelines. Before, the Mafia asserted behind-the-scenes control of the business while African Americans sold and used the drugs in their cities. Now the black dealers established connections and took control of their neighbourhoods. This later evolved to include not just black people controlling their businesses, but also local gangs of black people eliminating out-of-town black suppliers trying to control their neighbourhoods from a distance. Mr. Matthews clashed with the Black Mafia, and on Easter Sunday in 1972 in Atlantic City, New Jersey, the Black Mafia killed Tyrone, Mr. Millionaire Palmer, Mr. Matthews' main dealer in Philadelphia. At the Club Harlem, packed with 600 people at the time, many innocent bystanders were shot during the shootout, with 5 people killed and 26 people injured. No one was prosecuted for the crime, and none of the 799 potential witnesses came forward. 3 of Mr. Matthews' top lieutenants in the city were murdered by the Black Mafia. In 1972, Mr. Matthews held another drug dealer summit in Las Vegas at the Sands Hotel during the Muhammad Ali and Jerry Quarry boxing match. Soon after this meeting, police received authority to tap Mr. Matthews' phone lines, and he was recorded discussing drug transactions. In 1972, Mr. Matthews was charged in Skengfield, Florida, for trying to sell 40 pounds of cocaine. In January 1973, the DEA arrested Mr. Matthews in Las Vegas on charges of tax evasion and conspiracy to distribute heroin and cocaine. A federal magistrate originally set bail at $5 million, the highest bail amount ever set at the time. But the bail was reduced to $2.5 million when Mr. Matthews agreed to not fight extradition and be returned to New York. After a few weeks in detention in New York, Mr. Matthews' bail was further reduced to $325,000. Mr. Matthews was indicted on 6 accounts of tax evasion and conspiracy to distribute heroin and cocaine, and faced 50 years in prison. On July 2nd, 1973, Mr. Matthews was scheduled to appear in Brooklyn Courthouse but never showed. Mr. Matthews allegedly took $20 million and fled the country with his girlfriend. Mr. Matthews left behind his common-law wife, their 3 sons, and their Staten Island mansion and was never seen again. The FBI placed a $20,000 bounty on Mr. Matthews, the highest set by a federal agency since the FBI placed the same amount for the capture of the bank robber John Dillinger. So what are your thoughts on the crimes committed by Frank Matthews? Please let us know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, stay safe.